Hey everyone, yeah, Joe back again. Tonight we have the man, the myth, JP from Raiden Radio. How you doing?
I mean, I don't know about all that man the myth, but I certainly appreciate you, kind of welcoming me into your little cave on the internet. I really appreciate it.
Well, of course. Uh, you have been slowly building up your brand and your stockpile of various IP. I haven't talked to you probably a year and a half or so now.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, you've had a lot of changes in your life.
Yeah. I think the last time we spoke, I was living in the Pacific Northwest, and I am now in the deep South where it's about 110 degrees.
So yeah, that was my first question. How are you adjusting to life in the South?
It's kind of like have you ever thrown on those chill hop videos where there's like a um you'll see like a background, an animated background, and there's like rain falling, and there's like a raccoon reading a book in like a on the bed. That's
Yeah, yeah.
what the deep south is actually like. I step out onto my back porch, when the rains come, and it's like I'm living in one of those chill hop videos. Plus, there's barbecue here, so
Nice.
yeah, I
So,
definitely don't miss like the junkies and all that.
well, yeah, I assume you're trading like fentanyl for meth.
Um, no, it's pretty quiet around here. I mean, it's a college town, so it's mostly just like I live right across the street from a Christian college, so this being the first week of the
Oh,
term, I think they were playing like some kind of capture the flag game. That's about as ruckus as it gets here.
wow. Oh, a Christian college. I was going to ask if you had a lot of like drunk college age students stumbling around, but if
Now
they're
that's like a
Christian, maybe
mile down
not.
the road.
So then you're settling in fairly well. Not too much culture shock,
No,
other
no,
than the
no.
raccoons on beds.
Yeah, no, no, I'm good.
So now that I assume that you're still writing. Have you noticed any changes in the way you write? Any new inspirations or whatnot from the change of scenery?
I don't think so because a lot of my writing is kind of it's informed by my love of where I grew up, which is actually in the Northeast. So that's why a lot of my writing is very much it's kind of inner city, it's kind of urban. Um, but I definitely haven't written from a point of view where I want to go, like I'm longing to go back to the Pacific Northwest. Um, my affection for the Northeast um, remains predominant in my writing.
Do you think it remains that way? Well, yeah, you remain affectionate for the Northeast because in your mind there's kind of like an idealized version since you haven't lived there for a while, or um,
I mean,
or is it
I
something else?
definitely, I think, or at least, I theorize that when people leave home, they develop that romanticized version of home that you can never attain. Even when you're there again, it's never, it's never the way you imagine it. What you're really desiring is to go back in time, right, to when you were there and when it was
Hmm.
special to you. But no, it'll never actually live up to that vision.
Yeah, I was wondering. I had some friends who grew up in San Francisco in the 80s, and they always talk about it in this loving way. It was so great and so open. And then they went back, a couple of months ago, and they were like, oh my God, I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, it's really it's like that for everything in life, right? Like you imagine your childhood or your family is the idyllic version of itself, but reality was probably nothing like that.
Yeah. Or, if even if it was like that, it was probably like that for like one sliver of time that
Yeah,
has
but
long since passed.
like that is the image that you held on to, right? So in your mind's eye, that's how it was.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how does that translate into writing? Like why, like you mentioned, for some reason, many, if not most people, do have that idyllic version of at least some point in their past. So, how do you go about capturing that when you're writing?
I think that's something that's captured um, in the foundation of the story, right? So whether you're writing, about the morality of the story, um, the the characterization, everything is about building up that idealized version that it's just a representation of it. It isn't real, but you're trying to piece it together in the minds of your reader, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I guess that does. And do you think it's easy or difficult to tap into that nostalgic feeling in others? So, for example, if they're reading Noirlem or any of your other books, if uh, if you're writing this way, do you think it's easy to tap into that feeling within the reader?
Um, I mean, I don't want to say I'm a unique writer, but when I'm writing, I'm not I'm not concerned about instilling that in the reader. I definitely take the perspective that, the reader, whatever the reader gets out of the story, that's okay. So if they don't capture all those things that I was trying to put in there, that's fine. Their reading of it is going to be something different no matter what. So when I'm writing, I'm really not thinking about that all that much, because in that sort of the chaos of the reader's interpretation of the story, something completely different, something new, something can always be created out of that. They don't have to get every last thing that I'm trying to put into a story. It's
Hmm.
totally fine if they end up with their own version of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I've been wondering about kind of recently. In writing for different mediums, how much noise is in the line? So, for example, like if you're writing a novel, it's pretty much from God's lips to their ears. So
Mm,
there's not a whole lot unless you have an editor who screws you, or somehow whoever's doing the typesetting really messes up. Like there's nothing to really mess with that information. But in a comic book setting, you not only have the story you write, but you also have the art. Especially since comics are primarily a visual medium,
hmm.
even though what percentage is what is yet to be determined, I think. But an artist, I think, can really make things confuse the issue, I would say. So, how do you go about trying to, well, let me put it this way. How important is it to make sure that the audience gets the message you want versus whatever they get is okay?
So that's actually a really interesting question because of the two examples, like the two campaigns here,
Hmm.
because they're going to be wildly different, right? So Noirlem is very much like, um, it's like a continual comic strip, right? Where
Hmm.
you could probably take out 3 panels of every page, put it in a newspaper, and then spread it out over a couple of years, and you would have the full story. So it's a lot more. There's a lot more direction on my end from what is being put on the page. How Did I 2, on the other hand, I'm going to be taking a different kind of tact where I send the script to the artist and he sends me the pages, and there are parts of the book that I'm going to end up rewriting to kind of make their visual interpretation of the story, um, recomposed, like
Hmm.
in accordance with that. So it's going to be a lot more collaborative, of a creation than Noirlem.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, I was looking over some pages today and I was thinking about what I had written for the characters to say, and but the images were giving me all of these different ideas, to maybe just compose something that's totally different from what I'd previously written. So that I'm really excited to get into that.
Oh, interesting. So would you say you're more like Marvel method when you write for comics, or by the script? So, well, depending on what you consider the Marvel method, what I'm talking about is like you have basically a breakdown script or an outline,
Yeah.
where you say, you give the writer, like, I want basically these things on the page, and then when they give it back, you write the dialogue to fit the spaces that they have? Or are you more like you write everything out first and you give it to them, and it's up to them to interpret how to, more or less, how to put it on the page, including dialogue?
I mean, I'm definitely not Stan Lee where I just, have me or my secretary um fill in, contribute nothing until the artist is done and then fill everything in, from there. Um but I would say, I am not any sort of writer. I'm really kind of adapting to the medium a little bit. And so what I described for How to Die 2 is what I'm looking to get more into, that kind of Marvel style, more collaborative way of telling a story. All my writing before, I think I was a little bit more, script focused,
Hmm.
but with something like How Did I 2, I really want to kind of like uh, you know, take the kid gloves off and really open it up and see what I can do with the medium.
So is this something, this sort of change in attitude, is that something you really feel based on, now you've got several books under the belt, you sort of have a rhythm going, or is it that, you found this one artist who you really jive with?
Honestly, I think this newer outlook is coming from the amount of time I've been spending over on Aldis's channel on the Gutter, where we go through comic book history, and it's really like we've only done a handful of episodes, but it's been like attending um, a free lecture on the history, on the kind of grimy, down and dirty history of comics that I just don't have, and Aldous has. So it's really it's been a revelation, and I'm happy that it's been um, affecting, my outlook on the creation of comics.
Oh, it's interesting, to hear you say that. Uh, do you do you feel that now that you're getting into more of these things, do you feel that you have a better appreciation for not only the history, but maybe how things should be done, or best practices, so to speak?
I would say best practices is something I don't really focus on. I'm really like uh, a dog that ran out onto the baseball field. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm here. I'm just trying to have as much fun as I can while they let me.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting because, since, let's call it 2018, and you see like a real explosion in indies, um, the the bar to entry is much lower, since really anybody can start a kind of a crowdfunding campaign. And it's been interesting to me to look on the sidelines, especially when you have people who were in the industry previously, and they kind of view this as the day job. This is how they're going to make money, and they've got these ideas that are like streamlined. At least they sound streamlined. How do you create the most books, get the most sales in the most amount of time? Whereas you have people on the other side who, they don't have that experience, and they're kind of, um, how would you say, like they're kind of trying to find their way through the weeds, so to speak. But to me, it's also very interesting because the people who were in before, they're really locked into like one model that was the industry standard. Whereas I see a lot of creativity in the people who are just coming up. And there's sort of, what's the saying go? Like the bumblebee doesn't know it's not aerodynamic enough to fly.
Mm.
sort of a thing. Um, ah, being on one side of the indies, sort of, how do you feel like that? Do you kind of think that maybe people who don't have that industry experience just coming in, maybe they need to learn a little more, or do you think that the pros can maybe loosen up and try some new things, or both?
I think that there, like you said, like you said that there are two sides to it. I think there
Hmm.
are more. And what I mean by that is there are people who are not pros and they're trying to figure out the space, and they have aspirations to be to have, to sell, X amount of books and X amount of figurines and hats and toys, and that's great. And I'm happy for them. There are also people who, if they're like me, um, they're just trying to find another reader or two. And that, like, I don't have aspirations, to have a Saturday morning cartoon. That's just not who I am. If you look on this campaign here, um, you'll see that there's only $500 raised, but I got 30 backers and I'm pretty damn well happy with that. I got a book. Sometimes I might have one or two, kind of things to add to it.
Hmm.
That's it. That's all I'm looking to do. I'm purely not interested in moving, having merch made. Cuz that's just so different people are going to have different levels of involvement. Um
Right.
People want to do it full time. I'm not really all that interested in doing it full time. I'm happy to have a place where I can be creative. I can do weird and wild things. And there's, a small amount of people that are on board with it and continue to support me. And if I can get that to grow little by little at the end of the day, I'm going to be happy. I don't need a YouTube channel with 10,000 subs, to make me happy.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting point of view too. Um, yeah, you're right. I should have said it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
I do think too that if this is your main means of income, those people really feel the pressure to hustle, and they're the ones who are big on the merch and whatnot. Whereas people who tend to have day jobs or something else, they tend to be a little uh, more focused on the books and gaining readers as opposed to like the whole ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so let's talk about this campaign. Actually, I found it quite interesting. Um, so, in looking at it, the first thing that struck me was this is a much smaller book than the Noirlem #1.
Right. So, Noirlem #1 was a 90-page murder mystery. Um, this is a 14-page ash can. So, the goal of this book is to kind of capture some readers that have never, they haven't read a thing that I've created before. Um, I'm trying out a new platform. Fund My Comic is doing surprisingly well. I'm happy that I was wrong about it. I thought it was a bit premature, but it's done really well. And so this campaign is really a series of experiments. Can I capture some people who have maybe never read something I've made before and offer them a mini story within a larger story? Um, in the hope that I can capture them again. Can I put something in front of your eyes? Just a little taste, just a little something to see to see what I'm making and what I'm all about, so that when the full giant story comes out later on, you're going to want to see how it all plays out, how it all fits together.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the things that struck me when I first saw it, I was like, oh, geez, 14 pages. There's no way people are going to spend like $25 plus shipping for 14 pages. And then I realized, like, oh, actually, the prices are not bad. $3 for a digital copy, that's not bad. $7, of course, plus shipping for a physical copy, $9 for sign. Like those are all fairly reasonable prices and not so much out of a line with the mainstream industry.
And what it basically represents, it's only 14 pages, but it is a complete mystery, right? So you have a beginning, you have a middle, you have an end, and or you have a denouement, and then on the last page of the book you're going to have an event that is the larger mystery of the entire book. So when you're done with that book, you're going to get a little story, and then you're going to get, a preview of what's to come in the big story.
Hmm. And do you think this is kind of like this might be viable as sort of an intermediate for a lot of people? Because one thing that I've seen complaints about in the indies is that some people are taking up to 3 years between books. Other people are more or less getting out one a year. Do you think that this might be an intermediate where, you're not going to get back to a monthly publishing schedule
Mm.
like it used to be, but maybe if you're going to do, let's say, a book every 2 years, you might have like one to two of these guys in between to sort of satiate some of that desire on the reader's part.
I mean, I think that there has definitely been within the community some growing pains in terms of storytelling. Um,
Hmm.
there's definitely been some books where I think the part a lot of people that kind of got lost in the translation of traditional comic books and independent comic books is that, you still need to deliver on a story. Now, why
Right.
that is, I'm not here to, sling rocks at anybody, but I do think that is something that is lacking, is if you're going to have an ecosystem where you're putting out, a new book every 1 to 2 years, that that first book needs to basically hold people over, so they're going to want to get a book two when it ultimately comes out. And I think that kind of enticement, and I'm including myself in that. How Did I 2 is a sequel to um How to Die 1 was kind of waxing philosophically. It wasn't a very satisfying story. And so, you know, I think that's just something we kind of all need to improve upon.
Yeah, I did notice, and I noticed that there's, depending on which end of the business people come into the indies from, if they're either on the art side or on the writing side,
Mm,
there seems to be a couple of pitfalls that they fall into. A lot of times on the art side, I will notice that there are, like, it's not a complete story. It's, you'll get a whole book and you'll get to the end and it's like, okay, now we can actually start telling the story as opposed
yeah.
to actually getting into it. Um, so yeah, it makes me wonder, since really this sort of indies industry is so new, there's really no set path in how to do it. Speaking of best practices, earlier, I don't necessarily know that there are best practices for this kind of comic making. So, do you think that something like this, or like I know Rini draws with her Fiendish, she's having what she calls Fiendish 2.5, which
Mm.
is she wrote it, but somebody else is doing the art while she does Fiendish 3. Do you think that something like that might be more common as we go forward?
I mean, I'd like to think so. I'd like to say I hope so. But as to the question of why, I think it's more. I don't think there's an answer. I think it's more of an interesting question than anything. I think I think one of the possibilities is that, I think a lot of the people that came over from the professionals were emerging from an era where cool mattered more than anything, right? Like you could sell a book on it looking cool.
The
And
90s? Yes.
yeah, or at the very least were influenced by that, by that, yeah, that ecosystem basically. And so I think, yeah, I think that part that got lost is that now you're seeing a lot of projects that are being led by people who have they have the art down pat, right? Like they can make something that looks badass and cool, but as far as taking a story and parsing it out into an episodic adventure, that's something that takes a little bit more craft, a little bit more of the writing panache. And we're just in an era where, art is king, so I
Yeah.
think the storytellers are going to, um, yeah, actually, you know what? One example, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Only Death Can Save Us, I think does
Oh, uh
the episodic storytelling really well. So I'll say only the writers can save us.
huh. Yeah, I do think that there needs to be more synergy, and actually in the comic industry, we've seen this before. If you go back and you read a lot of those Image books, especially from the first crew to start Image Comics, those stories were awful.
Yeah.
I mean, they were just completely terrible, almost unreadable.
Yeah, I
They
mean, I
look cool
wasn't
as
gonna,
heck.
I wasn't gonna throw out Image, but yeah,
No, no, it's okay to throw out Image. I think that there's a lot to admire about what the guys did, especially in terms of business.
yeah,
But when it comes down to, the actual books that they produced, yeah, they sold good for a little while, but once the market collapsed in 91, they just weren't selling that well.
yeah.
The problem is
Didn't have the staying power.
they really needed to grab like a Chris Claremont to go over with them
Yeah.
and to write some of these books.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's for me it's interesting to see like the dichotomy between the two in the indies, because if you're an artist and you're writing your own story, of course it's good in some ways that you have control. You could do things that you couldn't do at the big two and whatnot, but without those writers there, and especially too, I very rarely see people using editors these days.
Yeah.
So without an editor to sort of like reel you in, I think it makes the stories weak. And then you see on the opposite side, you have a lot of people who came over from more of a literary world, and they're coming over to comics, and I see almost the opposite thing where they're getting artists, but the art isn't necessarily living up to what they wrote. So
Mm.
when you go about getting artwork and whatnot, how do you make sure that sort of the art is the quality and like emphasizing the levels or the things that it should?
I would say it's different for every book. It's also something I definitely need to get better at. Which I'm hoping to like. So, for example, um, Noirlem, you're making a 90-page book. And that really it involves kind of nickel and diming your way around. So you know, Noirlem can't look as good as How to Die 2 looks. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
it's just not possible um, on a shoestring budget. Um, How to Die 2, I'm sorry, the interior. I love that book. It's going to look awesome. It's going to look cool. Um, I shopped around, and since it's a smaller book, it's a lot easier to kind of manage the finances on. Um, I
Hmm.
definitely need to, um, as I'm getting more and more invested in this space and making more connections, I think it's going to get easier, but it's definitely been a challenge. Um, I will say, uh, How Did I 2? I'm finally getting, or sorry, Noirlem, I'm finally getting, the great Eric Weathers on letters. So I've been converted over to that. Um,
Nice.
I was talking to Jose Garcia the other day, so be on the lookout for something like that, something with him in the future. So
Oh wow.
you just have to kind of build those connections, and it's something that I have always sucked at, but I'm definitely looking to get better at.
Yeah, I mean, there's a different author. Not going to say names, but I was reading the book, and there's a character that's kind of like the Superman of his world.
Hmm.
He's supposed to be big and whatnot, but the way the artist had the guy standing was almost like effeminate. So
Mm.
it made me as the reader a little confused because the words are saying that this guy is, a Superman, righteous type of guy, but he looks very weak. So in my brain, I'm like, well, okay, is this on purpose? And like the art is intentionally clashing with the words to clue me in on something? Or is it just that, the author didn't know how to ask or didn't know what to look for in the art?
Yeah, and I mean that's something I've struggled with before too. That was probably another challenge with How to Die One is I should have had that. I wasn't really adept at wearing that director's hat, and
Mhm.
in asking for things, and I think that the book um, suffered a little bit from that.
So, with the current crew having been in it, let's say up to about 5 years now, do you think in another 5 to 10 years that on both sides, on the artists doing writing work and on the writers managing artist side, do you think we're going to see improvements on both ends?
Definitely. I mean, How to Die Two is really, I mean, right away, it's a redemption arc. This book is um, many times better than the first book on all accounts. It's going to be better from the printing. It's going to be something I'm going to keep getting better at. I would say I'm coming from my um, kind of I'm kind of emerging from my garage band days into my, ready to play the garden days, and it's only going to get better.
Nice. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about How to Die 2?
So, How Did I 2 is building upon the foundation of the first book. The first book, basically, it's a world where um, people are able to unlock superpowers, um, but they are only able to do that under the two conditions that number one, they have to be facing death. Um, and I mean, death is staring them in the face, it is coming, and nothing can stop it. Um, unless they are able to unlock that power. The second condition is that they have to have really suffered in life. So it's not a story about the very best and the brightest becoming superheroes and getting superpowers. It's about people who have just, people who are dangling from the bottom rungs of the ladder and are at their wits end. And if they have suffered enough, then when death comes for them, they will be able to fight it off by unlocking some power within themselves.
Hmm. And so that's the How to Die universe. Where do we pick up in How to Die 2?
So, How Did I 2 picks up right at the end of How to Die 1, where two characters, the Black Ice and Bishop White, they're fighting. Um, so, it picks up right at that moment, but we are immediately introduced to a new character, the woman on the cover, Madam Gray. Madam Gray. Madam Gray was a homeless schizophrenic. She has confronted death, and she now has the ability to control. She's a psychic, or she has psychic powers. So she has basically been able to take her ailment in life, schizophrenia, and use it as a weapon against others. Because schizophrenia is basically the brain kind of misfiring and interpreting reality. Um,
Hmm.
so, for example, if you've ever seen a homeless person wearing like a hoodie and a jacket in the middle of the summer, it's because their brain is not interpreting like the sensation of the weather correctly. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah.
everything is just misfiring. So she now has the ability to control control anything that you're perceiving. So you can see on the cover, um, that's how she wants you to see her. And then she's doing the number two, but she's kind of poking through reality and through that tear or those tears. That's what she actually looks like.
Hmm. And so, about how long is the book going to be? How many pages do you think?
32, same as the first. It's actually almost done.
Oh, wow. So, when is it launching?
It is launching this Friday on Bancroft.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So how long do you think it's going to take? Like, how long do you plan to have it up, and how long do you think it'll take to fulfill?
I am okay. I've done this before and gotten myself into trouble because I would put an
Oh, hello. Uh-oh. Temporary temporary suspension of the stream. So let's just go back for a second. So this is How to Die 2.
in a
Um,
month.
oh, there you are.
Oh, did I drop off?
Yeah, sorry, you did.
Oh, um, yeah. So I'm anticipating that it may be done before the campaign on Kickstarter is even done. So
Ah,
probably
interesting.
I can probably guarantee those are going to be shipping before the holidays. But again, I don't want to make a promise and then end up being wrong.
So it's really a fairly fast turnaround for you then.
Yeah, I am again not mentioning any names, but yeah, I'm not one who can tolerate overdue books. I don't
Yes,
I
yes,
like
I.
when I have a campaign that is beyond the estimated shipping date. Every day feels like a week, and every week feels like a month.
Yeah, I think just in watching campaigns, for the last 5 years or so, I think people generally have a good tolerance for about up to 1 year. But then, after that, people start to get a little antsy and wonder what's going on.
And again, not throwing shade on anybody who's overdue, but my tolerance is like zero.
Let's see. So Alex says, I don't mind overdue books. You can eventually fix late. If you launch a bad book, you're stuck with it forever.
That's a good point.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you don't want to turn out trash. And I think the other big thing is you have to tell people why. So, for example, during COVID, there were a lot of people who are having problems with printers and actually getting things printed. That's a pretty understandable delay. There's people who have had various illnesses pop up, or, family members die and stuff, and that's good. And even the occasional somebody will say, like, guys, I just effed up. I totally misjudged this. But if they show progress, if they're posting on Twitter or on YouTube or wherever that they are actually making progress on the book, I think most people are fairly forgiving. But I think it's got to be like a temporary thing, like if you sort of screw up your first book because you didn't quite understand how everything worked all together, or just how long things will take, I think that's kind of reasonable. But once you're, second book, third book, like, you should really have the timing down.
Yeah, and I'll tell you another thing about How to Die One that kind of threw me for a loop was I printed it using Mixam,
Hmm.
and I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know that they were just, farming out the print job. I had no idea about any of that.
Oh.
So I made Eudaimonia 1 and 2, had them printed. They looked great, really happy with it. Then I moved, and I'm guessing that they farmed it out to another printer. But man, these things were what's that word? It's like dog-eared. You know what I
Oh
mean? Where
no.
it's like these things were dog-eared as all hell. And again, not wearing that director's hat, I should have sent those things back. Um, I've had people tell me like, no, it's fine. It's pretty common, but it was like, no, man, like if you drop this book, it unfolds and it looks like a bunch of posters stapled together. It looks terrible. Doesn't feel good on the hands. So
Mm.
again, that's another one of those like and Alex said, better to make people wait than send out a crap book. I thought the printing on that was crap.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. That's happened to a lot of people too. So Alex says, I back so many books that they're always trickling in, so I don't really care. I get books all the time. Well, I in the past I was backing more books, before I sort of took my year sabbatical. And I was getting a lot of books all the time too. The only problem is, not everybody can afford to
Yeah.
be as invested in the hobby, and I think really people who are in the game, they want to provide the best experience possible,
Hmm.
because if people are happy with the product, of course they're going to
Yeah.
come back.
Yeah, and I should clarify, when I say that I have zero tolerance for late books, I mean my own. I can think of, half a dozen CG books off the top of my head that I have no idea when they're going to get here, but like that that doesn't bother me at all. It's when
Hmm.
I'm late that I
Yeah.
just can't take that.
Yeah, I think that's, sort of the mark of being somewhere between a creative and a business owner, which
Mm,
are two different things. But one is, having very high very high standards for yourself.
yeah.
So, looking at these campaigns, there's something that I noticed. How Did I 2 is coming out on Kickstarter. You've got Noirlem Listen, which is still available for 4 days, is it, or 3 days now?
I think it's 4.
4 days, yeah. So that would take us to August 26th, 2023. Back it while you can. And that's on Fund My Comic. Are you right now? Are you just kind of experimenting to see what the different platforms will offer and compare and contrast, or do you have a plan with how you're selling these?
So I think that How to Die 1 was one of the first campaigns to just be kind of shadow banned on Indiegogo.
Hmm.
And um, you know, in the interim, I have seen so many people in our kind of, sphere launch campaigns that just get ghosted on Indiegogo. I made a video on my channel a couple months ago to kind of explain why, but like I can't I can't allow my book to make money for a website that is shadow banning people that I know. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
just can't do that. Now, Kickstarter, I understand, may have a lot of problems, but I'm not aware of them. I think what Indiegogo was doing is worse than Kickstarter, right? Because Kickstarter bans people from their platform, but they at least tell you. Indiegogo will let your campaign page just sit there and they'll collect the money, but they will hide it from search. So that to me
Right.
is worse. Um, Now, as far as so I'm basically giving Kickstarter, a shot to see how it goes. I think this book is going to do well on that. I think it's the right audience for it. Um, Fund My Comic, I really feel like as a community, if we're going to talk about these platforms and wanting to carve out our own space, somebody has come along and they've done that. And Luke Stone's a good guy. Everybody knows him. People support him, and he took the step to make this. I think that as a community, we kind of owe it to at least give it a shot. So I wanted to, while I'm doing these experiments with doing an ash can and trying to entice people with a small piece of story, I just wanted to give them a shot and see what we can make of it.
Yeah, and so one question that I have for you, which is may sound a little silly, but for you, what is the purpose of these crowdfunding websites?
Um, I think that for Kickstarter and Indiegogo, the purpose is to kind of tap into a centralized audience. So the amount of activity on Kickstarter is kind of mind blowing, right? Like Indiegogo is really, the trying to think, the Dollar General of crowdfunding sites.
Kind of.
But yeah, Kickstarter, I think there's just like a massive audience there that if you can kind of capture their attention, you can really unearth, new readers, um, and kind of build from there. And I think Fund My Comic is in the infancy, or hopefully in the infancy of becoming that, right? If it can develop the kind of reputation for the place to go to get really creative, well thought out, well put together, books, that it can hopefully become that, maybe become, the new digital image.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of hopes for Fund My Comic, and then although to me the bigger potential is the distribution company that they're trying to put together too. Um, because one thing that I think sort of hampers us is, crowdfunding is great, and I think crowdfunding is the way of the future. But it would be nice to have physical retail presence. And even though a lot of comic shops seem to be dying, it'd still be nice to have product in there. But as an indie who's not within the diamond system, I think is really kind of rough um, to get in there. So I am hoping. But I asked about the crowdfunding sites because I've asked a bunch of people, and um, just from a business perspective, a lot of people don't view it the way I do. And
Okay.
you seem to be sort of along the same idea. Like, to me, if I'm going to put my product on their sites as opposed to just having my own, just selling it on my own website, like I need something back. And that's some sort of promotion, even if it's just putting me in a list, and then their audience. Whereas, with Indiegogo, a few years ago, it seemed okay. And in my opinion, it was the preferred platform for comics creators because people on Indiegogo were willing to spend more money. But I think that, with the shadow banning, kind of what's the point? If I have to bring my whole audience over there to buy the book, why would I give them 10%? I could do it on my own site and, save all that money.
Yeah, and you know what? I really wasn't around for those days, but I have to wonder if it ever was like that. Like, was there ever a point that it wasn't, if it wasn't the YouTuber bringing in the audience rather than Indiegogo? You know what I mean? Because like even back on my very first campaign, um,
Hmm.
they show you a breakdown of how people got to your page. And the percentages of people that were just browsing Indiegogo and backing books was like nothing. There was nothing. Everything was coming from emails, coming from, YouTube. Um, so if that audience ever existed on Indiegogo, I have never seen it.
That's interesting. It seemed like, back in 2018, 2019, maybe early 2020, that there was a bit of a boost, but, I don't have any access to the numbers, on the back end. So that's interesting to hear you say that.
I mean, I'm not saying I'm right. If I'm wrong, I'm willing to be open to that, but I just personally have never seen it.
Hmm. And I can understand certainly in the early days when Kickstarter seemed to be banning any and everyone relating to CG or potentially quote unquote problematic topics. So, I can understand in the early days why Indiegogo was certainly the preferred platform. But, in these days, not all of us are big creators getting, six figures on campaigns. I think a lot of us need to go and try to find an audience wherever the audiences may be.
Well, I'll tell you something else that's really funny. Um, this launch page that you see here, I have gotten an email once a week for months from Indiegogo. I don't know if it's an automatic. I mean, I'm sure it's an automatic thing. I don't know how it works, but they send me an email every week telling me, and it all says it's all the same. It says, "Hey, I saw this pre-launch campaign on Kickstarter. Let me tell you why you should really launch on Indiegogo." And then there's like a link, and I'm like, okay.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, hey, if I were Indiegogo, I'd try to be poaching the competition too. Um, so, with Noirlem on Fund My Comic, I believe, whoops, I believe that Luke had said there's going to be sort of like an open store, like you can leave the page up and people can still buy after the campaign officially ends. Are you planning on leaving it up there, or will it be taken down and then just the next time a Norlum book comes out, you'll sort of relist it so they can buy back issues?
I'm gonna keep it up. I don't. I'm gonna keep it up basically as a storefront. In fact, at the very bottom, um, there is a very ambitious stretch goal where if we get to 100 backers, which I highly doubt I'm going to do unless I leave it open, there's a print at the bottom that everybody's going to get um, that I'm calling Noirlem 1961. Yeah, that one there.
Oh yeah, that looks awesome.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. Um, Yeah, because I actually this was actually the original cover for the book,
Hmm.
but when I had this made, the character was originally written to be slightly older, like an older guy, um,
Hmm.
like Bunny from The Wire. But I ended up not using it because he ended up being written as a much younger character, plus a beard. Um, but yeah, so this is kind of like a future 1961 version.
Yeah, this is great. I love the atmosphere in this poster too.
Yeah. Hmm.
So one other thing that I noticed is that this book is available, or yeah, this Norlem, the long and short of it, is available on at Barnes and Noble.
Yep.
How'd you do that?
This property, at least for one more book, was picked up by a publisher. Um, so that's why the title of the ash can is Listen, and it doesn't say Noirlem anywhere because they basically have the rights to. When the second book comes
Oh.
out, it will be published by them. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, this one is housed in a publisher. Um, Made the deal pretty early on in the process too.
Oh, that's interesting. And so, out of curiosity, if you don't mind, how's it going from Barnes and Noble? I mean, you've got 11 ratings on there. Are the sales halfway decent, okay-ish?
I can, I can answer that question in exactly 9 days.
Okay, all right, no problem. Yeah, I was just wondering because so part of my issue, with the Kickstarter thing, and I don't mean to spread any bad or ill will or sound like I'm talking down to CG. It's just I think that while Comicsgate is fantastic and the readers are fantastic and really supportive of the community, I just think the community itself is too small, and even the greater comics reading community in the US at least is too small. And we need as a group to figure out ways to get our books out in front of people who aren't standard comics readers. They're not at the comic book shop every Wednesday. How do we get books in front of kids? How do we get it in front of adults who might go for a novel in this area? But they may, if they knew that there were comics also in that genre. So I'm always interested in people who are going to different venues to sell their books.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you a story. I what was it? I had a author meet and greet at a library about a month ago, and I brought copies of the book. I was going to answer questions. I was going to do a reading, and I show up, and like two people showed up. Um, they were both senior citizens that took one look at the book, and they realized it was a comic book, and they lost interest immediately. So I'm happy to talk about it and report on it. When I find that magic secret ingredient, I will be sure to let everybody know.
Yeah, seniors might not be quite the right audience.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be Generation X and below.
Hmm.
Because with Generation X in the 80s, you started having some comics sort of treat themselves seriously. And you had like Vertigo and things that were more aimed towards adults. Where the seniors, the boomers, when they aged out of Spider-Man, there was sort of nothing for them to go to. I think that a lot of people, especially in different fandoms today, like people who are into sci-fi, where did they go for comics? It's something that they read when they were younger, and maybe if they saw something that was cool, um, but more aimed for adults today, they would go for it.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna keep looking for that, that jump off.
Yeah. So Alex said it's shockingly hard to break out like that. Lots of hurdles and competition. Prose novels are even worse. Oh my God, yes they are.
Hmm.
Um, but that doesn't mean you don't attempt to find other avenues of distribution if needed. So I'm kind of wondering too. Have you ever thought about trying to sell overseas?
You know, I I'm gonna have to like wait because I know that there are people that are working on it, but like I I genuinely wouldn't even know how to begin approaching that. Um, this publisher is based in the UK,
Huh.
so you'll find a listing for this book on just about every website in the world that sells books. You can order it through there. I just don't have any figures yet on how many have been moved. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's why I kind of said like I have to wait like another. I'm waiting. I'm giving it another week, and then I'm going to start pressing for like sales figures and all that.
Yeah, it would be interesting to me. A country like France has relatively good comic slash graphic novel sales, relatively good for 2023. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way. But they really enjoy like jazz, and sort of they have a romanticism towards the U.S., especially like that Harlem period. So I was wondering, like, oh, if it were in French, I wonder if that would make it sell well, or perhaps when you have enough to make a larger volume, like
Mm.
a trade paperback of it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just kind
We'll
of
see.
curious. Hmm?
Oh, I was gonna say yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, because a lot of people are happy to just keep things the way that they are, which is fine. If your dream is to put out a book, I have absolutely no problem with that. But I'm just wondering, how do we keep this hobby, keep this industry from dwindling even more?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's tough.
Um, all right. So, uh, going back, Fund My Comic, Noirlem Listen, where the title is Listen, where you can also pick up a copy of, for $25, you could also pick up a copy of Norlem, The Long and the Short of It. 4 days left on that. How to Die 2 is coming soon, and you will be able to pick up How to Die 1 with that, right?
Yeah, actually, if you join the mailing list before we launch, you're going to get a free physical copy of book one when you get book two.
Oh, excellent.
But as I've already talked about, it is slightly dog eared.
Oh, well, hey, free. I mean,
Yeah.
plus that's, to me, that's kind of an interesting way to bring people up to speed. If they say, "Oh, well, I didn't read one, so I don't know about two." Well, hey, you get one for free if you buy
Yeah.
two, so you might as well get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, all right, and for How Did I Two, is it only going to be available on Kickstarter, or once it's done with its run on Kickstarter, are you going to have another one on Fund My Comic?
I was waiting for the end of that sentence, but if I do have it anywhere else, it will definitely be on Fund My Comic.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if that's, one thing people are going to do, because Kickstarter doesn't have the in-demand function, I don't believe.
Yeah.
Um, so, Fund My Comics seems like a good option if you want to keep the sales open.
Yeah. I mean, you can almost look at it as being a superior form of eBay, because that's how a lot of
Hmm.
creators sell their back catalog is just through eBay. Might as well keep it in house and to people within the community. And by that I
Yeah,
mean the
absolutely.
fees.
Right, right. All right. And so, is there anything else we can expect coming up in the near future or the next year? What are your
Oh
plans?
boy. Let's see here. Eudaimonia 3. Um, that's the one I'm doing a little something with Jose Garcia on. I'm thinking about taking another book I was working on called The Rough and Tumble, um, which is going to be a story about aging cowboys fighting the early Italian gangsters in 1800s Chicago. I was thinking about
Ooh.
breaking that down into more of an episodic adventure, and just seeing if I can get the first floppy done. Maybe tap tap a good Western style artist to work on that with. So yeah, there's definitely a lot in the pipeline.
Ah, okay. So maybe moving to the South has had an influence on you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for coming out. Um, everyone, I will have more people on soon as I slowly get the channel back up to speed. Friday nights, I will be on the Dungeon Delvers channel for classic Gamma World, playing the character Rex Dashington, human mech pilot. And soon, before too long, we'll have more updates on my own campaign for Empire of the Undying Sun. So thank you everyone for coming by. Thanks, JP.
Thank you so much for having me on, and hail to the chat.
Hail to the chat.